Bikers finds little girl lying among trash bags. What he did next made everyone cry. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Jack McCullen guided his Harley through the quiet streets of Brookhaven. The familiar rumble of his bike beneath him brought a sense of peace he'd come to appreciate in his later years. At 62, these solo rides had become his daily ritual, a way to clear his head before starting another day of mentoring at the Veterans Center. The crisp autumn air nipped at his weathered face as he navigated the familiar roads. His gray beard ruffled in the wind, and his leather vest creaked with each turn. The town was just beginning to stir. Shop owners unlocking their doors, early morning joggers making their rounds. Jack decided to take his usual shortcut through Henderson Alley. As he turned into the narrow passage, something caught his eye among the scattered trash bags and cardboard boxes. He slowed his bike, his instincts telling him something wasn't right. There, between two overflowing dumpsters, lay what looked like a small bundle of clothes. But as Jack cut the engine and swung his leg over his bike, his heart nearly stopped. It wasn't just discarded clothing. It was a child. "Dear God," he muttered, his boots crunching on broken glass as he approached carefully. The little girl couldn't have been more than 7. She was curled up tight, clutching a ratty stuffed bunny to her chest. Her brown hair was matted with dirt, and her clothes were torn and filthy. What made his blood run cold were the dark bruises visible on her arms and face. The girl's eyes flew open at his approach, wide with fear. She tried to scramble backward, pressing herself against the brick wall. "Hey there, sweetheart," Jack said softly, keeping his voice gentle despite the anger rising in his chest at whoever had hurt this child. He crouched down, ignoring the protest in his bad knee, trying to make himself less threatening. "I'm not gonna hurt you. My name's Jack." The girl clutched her bunny tighter but didn't try to run. Her eyes darted between Jack and the entrance to the alley, as if calculating her chances of escape. "That's a nice bunny you got there," Jack continued, staying perfectly still. "Does he have a name?" She didn't answer, but her grip on the stuffed animal loosened slightly. Jack could see she was shivering in the morning chill. "You must be cold," he said, slowly shrugging off his worn leather jacket. "Would you like to borrow my jacket? It's nice and warm." The girl watched him with wary eyes as he held out the jacket. When she didn't move away, Jack inched forward and gently draped it around her shoulders. It swallowed her tiny frame, but she pulled it closer, seeking its warmth. "There's a diner just down the street," Jack said, his voice still soft and steady. "They make the best hot chocolate in town. Would you like some?" The mention of hot chocolate seemed to spark something in her eyes. After a moment's hesitation, she gave a tiny nod. "May I pick you up?" Jack asked, holding out his arms. "I promise I'll be careful." Another slight nod. Moving slowly, Jack reached out and scooped her up, cradling her against his chest. She was light, too light, and she trembled in his arms. Her stuffed bunny remained clutched tightly in her small fist as Jack carried her toward his motorcycle. He held her close, protective instincts he thought long buried surging to the surface. Whatever had happened to this child, whoever had hurt her, Jack knew in that moment he wouldn't rest until she was safe. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story." The bell above Lena's diner door chimed as Jack entered, cradling the small girl wrapped in his leather jacket. The morning regulars looked up from their coffee cups, their eyes widening at the unusual sight of the gruff former biker holding a child. "Lena," Jack called out, his voice urgent but controlled. "Need some help here?" Lena emerged from behind the counter, her gray hair tucked neatly under a hairnet. Her warm brown eyes took in the scene, and without missing a beat, She guided Jack to a quiet booth in the corner, away from prying eyes. "I'll get some hot cocoa," she said softly, her experienced gaze noting the girl's condition. "Poor thing looks half frozen." Jack settled into the booth, keeping the girl secure in his arms. She hadn't let go of her stuffed bunny since he found her, clutching it like a lifeline. Up close in the diner's warm light, he could see the dark circles under her eyes and the way her clothes hung loose on her small frame. Lena returned with 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate, topped with tiny marshmallows. She set them down gently, careful not to make any sudden movements. "There you go, sweetheart. Nothing warms you up like some hot cocoa." The girl's eyes darted between Jack and Lena, then fixed on the mug. Jack could feel her trembling slightly. "It's okay," he said, his gruff voice softened to barely above a whisper. "You're safe here. Nobody's gonna hurt you." Slowly, the girl reached for the mug with one hand, the other still holding tight to her bunny. She took a tiny sip, and for the first time, her face showed a flicker of something other than fear. "That's good, isn't it?" Jack smiled, his weathered face creasing with kindness. "I'm Jack, and this is my friend Lena. Can you tell us your name?" The girl lowered her mug, leaving a small chocolate mustache on her upper lip. After a long moment, she spoke in a voice so quiet they had to lean in to hear. "Emma?" "Emma," Jack repeated warmly. "That's a beautiful name." Lena pulled out her phone, but Jack shook his head slightly. They needed to give Emma time to feel safe before involving authorities. "Emma, can you tell us about where you came from?" Jack asked gently. Emma's fingers tightened around her bunny. "The bad man," she whispered, her voice trembling. He said nobody would ever love me." Jack's jaw clenched, and he shared a look with Lena that spoke volumes. His large hand, calloused from years of working on motorcycles, carefully patted Emma's shoulder. "That's not true, Emma. Not true at all," he said firmly but kindly. "You're safe now, and we're going to make sure you stay that way." The warmth of the diner and the comfort of finally feeling secure began to take their toll on Emma. Her eyes grew heavy, and she leaned against Jack's chest, still holding her cocoa mug and bunny. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing deep and even. Lena watched the scene with tears in her eyes. "Jack, we need to call social services. This child needs help." Jack nodded slowly, looking down at Emma's sleeping face. "You're right. Make the call, Lena, but I'm not leaving her side until I know she's really safe." The bell above Lena's diner door chimed as 2 police officers stepped inside. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows, and the few remaining customers looked up from their coffee cups with curious expressions. Jack sat protectively next to Emma, who was still wrapped in his leather jacket. She had dozed off, her head resting against his arm, the stuffed bunny clutched tight against her chest. Lena stood behind the counter, wringing her dish towel between her weathered hands. "Afternoon, officers," Lena called out softly, trying not to wake Emma. "Thank you for coming." The officers, one older with graying temples and one fresh-faced rookie, approached the booth where Jack and Emma sat. Jack noticed their hands instinctively resting near their holsters when they saw his tough appearance, but their stance relaxed when they spotted the sleeping child. "Sir, ma'am," the older officer said, "we received a call about an abandoned child." Jack nodded, speaking in hushed tones. "Found her this morning, lying among trash bags in the alley off Monroe Street. She's got bruises. Been through something rough." The rookie officer pulled out a notepad while his partner crouched down to Emma's level. The movement stirred her awake, and she immediately tensed, pressing herself closer to Jack. "It's okay, sweetheart," Jack reassured her, his gruff voice gentle. "These officers are here to help. Before anyone could say more, the diner door burst open. A man in his late 30s stormed in, his eyes wild and bloodshot, his clothes wrinkled and stained. The smell of alcohol followed him like a cloud. "Where is she?" he demanded, scanning the diner. "That's my daughter." Emma let out a small whimper and tried to make herself smaller behind Jack's arm. Jack's jaw clenched, and he felt his muscles tighten. He'd seen men like this before, men who left destruction in their wake. "Sir, please calm down," the older officer said, stepping between the man and the booth. "Can you identify yourself?" "Name's Daryl," he spat. "And that's my little girl you got there. Emma, come here now." The officers exchanged uncertain glances. The rookie pulled Daryl aside, while his partner spoke into his radio, presumably checking the man's claim. Lena moved closer to the booth, her face tight with concern. "Jack," she whispered, "that man's been in here before, always causing trouble." Jack nodded, his heart pounding as he watched the officers confer. Emma trembled beside him, and he could feel her small fingers gripping his shirt. After what seemed like an eternity, the older officer approached them again. "Sir, we've confirmed he is the girl's father and legal guardian. We'll need to release her to his custody." "You can't be serious," Jack growled, his voice low enough that Emma wouldn't hear. "Look at her. Look at how scared she is." "Without evidence of immediate danger, our hands are tied," the officer replied, regret evident in his eyes. "We'll open an investigation, but for now—" Daryl pushed past the rookie officer. "Emma, get over here, now!" Emma's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at Jack. He wanted nothing more than to scoop her up and ride away on his motorcycle, to take her somewhere safe. But he knew that would only make things worse. "It's going to be okay, Emma," he said softly, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. "I promise." The officers helped Emma gather her few belongings. She clutched her stuffed bunny tight as Daryl roughly took her arm. Jack stood, his fists clenched at his sides, watching helplessly as Emma was led away. She looked back once, her eyes full of fear and sadness, before disappearing through the diner door with her father. Jack stood outside Lena's diner, his weathered hands gripping the iron railing. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, but the warmth did little to ease the chill in his bones. His mind kept replaying the scene from yesterday, Emma's frightened eyes as she was led away by Daryl. Something about that man's demeanor had set off every alarm bell in Jack's head. "You're doing that thing again," Lena said, stepping outside with 2 steaming cups of coffee. She handed one to Jack, the ceramic warm against his calloused fingers. "What thing?" he asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. "That thing where you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." Lena leaned against the railing beside him. "I haven't seen you this worked up since you quit riding with the old crew." Jack took a slow sip of coffee, letting the bitter warmth flood his throat. 20 years ago, he would have handled this differently, with fists and fury. But he wasn't that man anymore. The accident that claimed his best friend's life had changed everything, steering him toward a quieter life of mentoring troubled youth and helping veterans. "I never thought I'd get mixed up in something like this, Lena," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "But that little girl, the way she looked at me, like I was the first person who'd shown her any kindness in God knows how long." Lena placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Then trust those instincts. Jack, they've never steered you wrong before." Jack nodded slowly, his jaw set with determination. "I need to know more about this Daryl character. Something's not right there." "The police station's open until 6, Lena suggested. "Mary works the front desk on Thursdays. She might be able to help." Jack finished his coffee and handed the empty cup back to Lena. "Thanks for the push." The ride to the police station helped clear his head. The familiar rumble of his motorcycle beneath him had always been therapeutic, even after all these years. The station was quiet when he arrived, just a few officers milling about, and Mary at the front desk, exactly as Lena had said. "Jack McCullen," Mary smiled warmly. "Haven't seen you in here for a while. Not since you helped with that Veterans Outreach program." "Need a favor, Mary," Jack said, keeping his voice low. "Looking for information on someone named Daryl. He's got a little girl named Emma." Mary's smile faded slightly. "This about yesterday's incident? Word travels fast in small towns." "Just want to make sure the girl's safe," Jack said honestly. Mary glanced around before typing something into her computer. A few minutes later, she handed Jack a thin manila folder. "Take it to the break room. Bring it right back when you're done." Jack's hands trembled slightly as he opened the folder under the harsh fluorescent lights of the empty break room. With each page he turned, his heart grew heavier. Daryl's record was extensive: domestic violence, drug possession, assault charges. The dates stretched back years, a pattern of escalating violence and substance abuse. The final page was a domestic violence report from just 6 months ago. Jack's coffee-stained fingers clenched the edge of the paper, crumpling it slightly. Every suspicion he'd had about Daryl was confirmed in black and white, and it only strengthened his resolve. Emma needed protection, and somehow he would find a way to help her. Jack's motorcycle rumbled into the courthouse parking lot early the next morning. The massive brick building loomed ahead, its steps already crowded with people heading to and from their appointments. He tucked his leather riding gloves into his jacket pocket and smoothed down his clean flannel shirt, the nicest one he owned. Inside, the air felt stiff and formal. Jack's boots echoed against the polished floor as he made his way to the public records office. A thin woman with silver-rimmed glasses looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" she asked, eyeing his weathered appearance. "Yes, ma'am. I need to look up some custody records." Jack's voice was soft but firm. "For a man named Daryl Thompson and his daughter Emma." The clerk typed something into her computer. "Relationship to the parties involved?" Jack hesitated. "Concerned citizen. Found the little girl in trouble yesterday." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Public records are available in the research room. Follow me." The research room was small and cramped, with outdated computers lined up against one wall and filing cabinets along another. The clerk showed him how to access the database, and Jack settled into an uncomfortable plastic chair. His fingers, more used to gripping handlebars than typing on keyboards, pecked slowly at the letters. Each new document revealed another piece of the puzzle. Daryl had full custody of Emma since her mother's death 3 years ago. There were no other living relatives listed. Jack's jaw clenched as he read through the custody hearing transcripts. Daryl had presented himself as a reformed man, claiming steady employment and a stable home. The judge had granted him custody with minimal supervision requirements. "Bunch of bull," Jack muttered under his breath, earning a sharp look from another researcher nearby. He dug deeper, printing out relevant documents and organizing them carefully. His eyes caught on a concerning detail. Daryl's required check-ins with family services had stopped 6 months ago. No one had followed up. The morning stretched into afternoon as Jack methodically built his case. He'd seen enough courtrooms from the wrong side of the law to know how they worked. This time, he'd use that knowledge for something good. A young law clerk noticed his growing pile of papers and offered him a manila folder. "Looks like you could use this," she said kindly. "Thanks," Jack replied, carefully sliding the documents inside. "Say, you wouldn't happen to know who handles child welfare cases around here?" The clerk pointed him toward the family court office, but it was already closed for lunch. Jack glanced at his watch. Nearly 1 o'clock. His stomach growled, reminding him he'd skipped breakfast, but food would have to wait. He tucked the folder securely inside his jacket and headed for the courthouse exit. The morning's research had given him plenty to think about, but he needed more. Emma's school would be his next stop tomorrow. Teachers saw kids every day. They might know things that never made it into official reports. As Jack walked down the courthouse steps, he patted the folder inside his jacket. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Each piece of paper was another tool to help Emma, another way to make sure she stayed safe. The old motorcycle rumbled to a stop in front of Brookhaven Elementary School. Jack switched off the engine and sat there for a moment, feeling oddly self-conscious. His weathered leather jacket and rough appearance stood out against the cheerful yellow building with its colorful playground equipment. Taking a deep breath, Jack walked through the main entrance. The halls were quiet, with only the distant sounds of children reciting multiplication tables filtering through classroom doors. At the front desk, a secretary eyed him with mild concern. "Can I help you?" she asked, her hand hovering near the phone. "Name's Jack McCullen. I need to speak with Emma Harrison's teacher." His voice was gentle, despite his gruff appearance. "It's about her welfare." The secretary's expression softened slightly. "Let me call Mrs. Peterson. Please have a seat." Jack lowered himself into a tiny plastic chair meant for children, his knees nearly touching his chest. The walls around him were covered with student artwork, bright crayon drawings of families holding hands under sunny skies. His heart tightened, wondering if Emma had ever drawn such happy pictures. A few minutes later, a woman in her mid-40s appeared. She had kind eyes and wore a cardigan decorated with alphabet letters. "Mr. McCullen, I'm Sarah Peterson. Let's talk in my classroom." They walked to an empty classroom where tiny chairs surrounded low tables. Artwork and educational posters covered every wall. Mrs. Peterson pulled up 2 adult-sized chairs. "Emma's been in my class since September," she began, folding her hands in her lap. "She's such a bright girl, but—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "There have been concerns." Jack leaned forward. "What kind of concerns?" "She misses a lot of school. When she does come, she's often unwashed, wearing the same clothes several days in a row." Mrs. Peterson's voice grew quieter. "She falls asleep in class sometimes, like she's not getting enough rest at home." Jack's jaw tightened. "Has she ever talked about her home life?" Mrs. Peterson nodded slowly. "Once, after class, she was crying. She didn't want to leave. She told me—" The teacher's eyes grew misty. "She said she didn't want to go home because the bad things happen at night." Jack's hands clenched into fists. He forced them to relax, but his voice was rough when he spoke. "Has anyone reported this?" "Several times," Mrs. Peterson replied, frustration evident in her tone. "But without concrete evidence, and her father can be very convincing when authorities visit." Jack stood up, his decision made. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. You've been very helpful." "Mr. McCullen," she called as he reached the door. "Please, help her if you can. That little girl deserves so much better." Back on his bike, Jack pulled out a worn map of Brookhaven. He'd managed to get Daryl's address from his earlier courthouse visit. The neighborhood was on the outskirts of town, in an area known for its rundown rental properties. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Jack guided his motorcycle through increasingly neglected streets. Paint peeled from houses, and chain-link fences surrounded bare dirt yards. He slowed down as he approached Daryl's address, his experienced eyes taking in every detail of the small, shabby house where Emma lived. Jack's motorcycle rumbled to a stop at the end of a cracked, weed-infested driveway. The house before him made his stomach turn. Paint peeled from weathered boards like dead skin, and broken shutters hung crooked against grimy windows. Beer cans littered the overgrown lawn, glinting dully in the late afternoon sun. He killed the engine and stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet. No kids playing, no dogs barking, just the occasional rustle of dead leaves skittering across the broken concrete. Lord Almighty, Jack muttered under his breath. His weathered hands gripped the handlebars of his bike tighter as he surveyed the scene. A rusty chain-link fence surrounded the property, its gate hanging by a single hinge. The mailbox lay crushed in the weeds, stuffed with what looked like months of unopened letters. The smell hit him as he approached the house, a sickly sweet odor of garbage and something worse. Rotting food, maybe, or worse. Jack's nose wrinkled as he carefully made his way up the creaking porch steps. Empty liquor bottles lined the windowsills like silent sentinels. Through a crack in the dirty front door, Jack could see into what must have been the living room. The furniture was stained and torn, pizza boxes and takeout containers scattered across every surface. That's when he saw her. Emma stood at a window on the second floor, her small face pressed against the glass. Even from this distance, Jack could see the sadness in her eyes. She held her stuffed bunny close, its matted fur pressed against her chest. When she spotted him, her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't move. Jack's heart clenched. The girl looked even more withdrawn than when he'd found her in the alley. Her clothes hung loose on her thin frame, and her hair was tangled and unwashed. A loud crash from inside made Emma jump and disappear from the window. Jack heard Daryl's muffled voice, angry and slurred, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Every instinct told Jack to burst through that door right now. His muscles tensed, ready to move. But he knew that wouldn't help Emma, not in the long run. He needed to do this right, needed to make sure when he got her out, it would be for good. Forcing himself to turn away, Jack walked back to his motorcycle. His hands shook as he started the engine. The image of Emma's face at that window burned in his mind. He knew what he had to do next. Sarah, the social worker he'd met during his courthouse visit, had given him her card. She'd seemed different from the others, someone who truly cared about the kids she worked with. Jack patted his jacket pocket, feeling the card there. As he rode away, the setting sun cast long shadows across the neglected yard. Jack's jaw clenched with determination. He wouldn't let Emma spend another night in that house if he could help it. Not one more night. The morning sun filtered through the coffee shop's windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Jack sat at a corner table, his large frame making the small chair creak beneath him. His weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of black coffee as he watched Sarah Thompson make her way through the door. The social worker was younger than he'd expected, maybe in her mid-30s, with kind eyes and worry lines etched around her mouth. She carried a thick manila folder under one arm and ordered a latte before joining him. "Mr. McCullen," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "I've heard quite a bit about you from the police department." Jack shifted uncomfortably. "Just Jack is fine, and I hope what you heard wasn't all bad." Sarah's lips quirked into a small smile. "Actually, they mentioned you do good work with the youth center. That's partly why I agreed to meet with you." She opened her folder and pulled out some papers. "But I have to be honest, Emma's case is complicated." "Complicated how?" Jack leaned forward, his coffee forgotten. "That girl's being abused, plain and simple." Sarah sighed, running a hand through her short brown hair. "Nothing about these cases is plain and simple. Daryl Matthews has primary custody. Yes, there have been reports, but nothing concrete enough for removal. The system—" She paused, frustration clear in her voice. "The system is overwhelmed. We have too many cases, not enough foster homes, and judges who are reluctant to separate families without irrefutable evidence." "But you've seen her file," Jack insisted, his voice low and urgent. "The bruises, the missed school days, the teachers' concerns. I saw where they live, Sarah. No child should have to stay in conditions like that." Sarah spread several documents on the table between them. "I know. Trust me, I know. I've been doing this job for 8 years, and cases like Emma's keep me up at night. But we need more than suspicions and circumstantial evidence." Jack's fist clenched on the table. "So we just leave her there? Wait until something worse happens?" "That's not what I'm saying." Sarah leaned forward, her voice firm but compassionate. "Look, I want to help Emma too, but we have to do this right, or Daryl could end up keeping her anyway, and we'll have made things worse." Jack fell silent, studying the social worker's face. Despite her initial skepticism, he could see the same determination in her eyes that he felt in his heart. "What do we need?" he finally asked. Sarah pulled out a legal pad and began writing. "Documentation. Photographs of the living conditions. Witness statements from teachers, neighbors, anyone who's observed suspicious behavior. Medical records if we can get them. And most importantly, we need Emma to feel safe enough to tell her story." Jack nodded slowly. "I can help with some of that. I know people in the neighborhood, and Lena from the diner is willing to testify about Emma's condition when we found her." "That's a start," Sarah said, making more notes. "But I need to be clear. This won't be quick, and it won't be easy. The courts move slowly, and Daryl will likely fight us every step of the way." "I don't care how long it takes," Jack said firmly. "That little girl needs help, and I'm not giving up on her." Sarah studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Okay," she said, gathering her papers. "I'll help you, but we do this by the book, understand? No vigilante justice, no confrontations with Daryl. We build our case properly." "Understood," Jack agreed, relief washing over him at finding an ally in the system. Sarah checked her watch and started packing up her folder. "I'll start pulling what records I can access. In the meantime, start gathering those witness statements. And Jack?" She met his eyes seriously. "Be careful. Daryl has a history of violence when cornered." Jack sat across from Sarah at her cramped office desk, surrounded by stacks of manila folders and the soft hum of a dusty ceiling fan. The morning light filtered through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across the scattered papers between them. "I've pulled everything I could find on Daryl," Sarah said, her voice heavy with concern. She pushed her reading glasses up her nose and spread out several documents. "It's worse than we thought." Jack leaned forward, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the desk. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the pages before him. Police reports, court documents, hospital records. Each piece of paper told another chapter in Daryl's dark story. 3 assault charges in the past 5 years, Sarah continued, pointing to different sections of the reports. 2 of them involved domestic violence. He served time for drug possession, and there are multiple restraining orders from different women. Jack's jaw clenched. The more he learned about Daryl, the more his stomach turned. "What about Emma's mother?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah shuffled through more papers. "She passed away when Emma was 3. Drug overdose." She paused, her expression grim. There were suspicious circumstances, but nothing was ever proven. Jack stood up and paced the small office, his boots heavy on the worn carpet. The walls seemed to close in around him as he thought about Emma living with such a monster. How has he kept custody all this time? "The system's overwhelmed," Sarah explained, frustration evident in her voice. "Unless there's concrete evidence of immediate danger, cases can slip through the cracks. Daryl's smart enough to keep the worst of it hidden." Over the next few days, they dug deeper. They discovered Daryl had moved between 3 different towns in the past 2 years, always one step ahead of social services. They found reports from neighbors about shouting in the middle of the night, about a little girl crying. Sarah worked her connections, speaking to other social workers who dealt with Daryl. Each conversation revealed another piece of the troubling puzzle. Jack spent hours reviewing everything, making notes, building their case. "We need more recent evidence," Sarah said on the 4th morning of their investigation. "Something current that shows Emma's in danger." Jack nodded, running a hand through his gray hair. "I'm going back to her school. Maybe now that we know more, the teachers will open up." He stood, his leather jacket creaking as he moved. "There's got to be someone there who's noticed something." Sarah gathered the files into a neat stack. "Be careful, Jack. Daryl's got a history of reacting violently when he feels cornered." "I've dealt with men like him before," Jack said, his voice steady but his eyes hard. "Right now, all that matters is getting Emma somewhere safe." He headed for the door, the weight of everything they'd learned sitting heavy on his shoulders. The morning sun was bright as he stepped outside, his motorcycle waiting faithfully in the parking lot. As he swung his leg over the seat, he thought about Emma's frightened eyes that first day in the alley. No child should live in fear of their own father. The engine roared to life, and Jack pointed his bike toward Emma's school, determination burning in his chest. The evidence they'd gathered painted a clear picture of who Daryl really was. Now they just needed to prove he was still the same man. The old brick schoolhouse looked different in the afternoon light. Jack pulled his motorcycle into the visitors' parking space, his weathered boots crunching on loose gravel. The playground was empty now, the kids gone home for the day, but a few cars still dotted the parking lot, teachers staying late to grade papers and prepare for tomorrow. Jack straightened his leather jacket and ran a hand through his gray hair. He might look out of place in an elementary school, but he didn't care. Emma needed someone to fight for her. Mrs. Peterson, Emma's teacher, met him at the front office. She was a kind-faced woman in her 50s with reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. "Mr. McCullen, thank you for coming back. Let's talk in my classroom." They walked down the hallway, past artwork-covered walls and rows of bright lockers. The smell of chalk dust and cleaning supplies filled the air. Mrs. Peterson's classroom was warm and inviting, with student artwork displayed prominently and a reading corner filled with cushions. "Please, have a seat," she said, gesturing to her desk where she'd arranged 2 chairs. Jack lowered himself into one of the small chairs, feeling awkward but focused. "How has Emma been doing?" Mrs. Peterson's face grew serious. "Well, she's been coming to school more regularly since you found her that day. But I'm worried about her, Mr. McCullen. She barely speaks to anyone, jumps at loud noises, and spends recess alone with that stuffed bunny of hers." Jack's jaw tightened. "Has she said anything about her home life?" "Not directly, but—" Mrs. Peterson opened her desk drawer and pulled out a drawing. "She made this in art class yesterday." The crayon drawing showed a small stick figure with yellow hair, Emma, standing next to a large, dark figure. The dark figure had angry red scribbles all around it. In the corner, a smaller figure wore what looked like a leather jacket. "She's drawn you too, Mr. McCullen," Mrs. Peterson said softly. "The children were supposed to draw their families, but Emma—" She trailed off, her eyes sad. Jack studied the drawing, his heart heavy. "Has she ever mentioned a bad man to you?" Mrs. Peterson nodded slowly. "Once, about 2 months ago, she was crying during lunch, and when I asked what was wrong, she said she didn't want to go home because the bad man would be angry again. I reported it to the principal, who contacted social services, but—" She spread her hands helplessly. "Nothing seemed to come of it." Jack pulled out his phone and took a picture of the drawing. Would you be willing to make a statement about what you've observed? My friend Sarah, she's a social worker, and I are trying to help Emma." "Of course," Mrs. Peterson said firmly. "I've been teaching for 25 years, Mr. McCullen. I know the signs of abuse when I see them. That child needs help." Jack stood, careful not to knock over the small chair. "Thank you. You've been more help than you know." Outside the school, Jack called Sarah immediately. Her voice was determined when she answered. "I just got out of a meeting with Family Services. What did you find out?" "I've got more evidence," Jack said, climbing onto his motorcycle. "The teacher's willing to make a statement, and we've got documentation of Emma's behavior at school. When can we meet with a lawyer?" "I've already scheduled a meeting for tomorrow morning at 9, Sarah replied. "We're going to do this right, Jack. We're going to help her." Jack started his bike, the engine rumbling to life. "Tomorrow at 9, then. We'll get her out of there, Sarah. We have to." Jack's weathered boots squeaked against the polished floor of the law office as he and Sarah waited in the reception area. The place felt too fancy, with its leather chairs and fancy artwork. He fidgeted with the manila folder in his lap, stuffed with all the evidence they'd gathered about Daryl. "You okay?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle. Jack nodded, running a hand through his gray hair. "Just never been much for lawyers and such." The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes, looked up from her desk. "Mr. Peterson will see you now." They followed her down a hallway lined with law degrees and certificates. The lawyer's office was bigger than Jack's entire living room. Mr. Peterson, a man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit, stood up from behind his massive desk. "Please, have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chairs in front of him. Jack and Sarah sat down, and Jack placed the folder on the desk. "Everything we've got is in here," he said. "Police reports, school records, witness statements from teachers." Mr. Peterson opened the folder and started reading. His expression remained neutral as he flipped through the pages. The only sound in the room was the tick-tock of an antique clock on the wall. After what felt like forever, the lawyer looked up. "I'll be straight with you both. This is going to be an uphill battle." Sarah leaned forward. "But the evidence clearly shows neglect and abuse." "Yes," Mr. Peterson agreed, "but courts are generally reluctant to terminate parental rights unless there's immediate, proven danger to the child." He turned to Jack. "And there's another issue we need to discuss." Jack's stomach tightened. He knew what was coming. "Your past, Mr. McCullen. Your involvement with motorcycle gangs. Your arrests." "That was a long time ago," Jack said firmly. "I've changed. Been working with troubled kids for years now." The lawyer nodded. "I understand that, but the court will look at your history. They might question your ability to provide a stable home for Emma." Jack's hands clenched into fists. "So what are you saying? That we should just give up? Leave that little girl with that monster?" Sarah placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Jack." Mr. Peterson held up his hands. "I'm not saying we should give up. I'm saying you need to be prepared for a difficult fight. We'll need character witnesses, proof of your community involvement, evidence of your current lifestyle." Jack took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "Whatever it takes. I made that girl a promise, even if she doesn't know it. I won't let her down." The lawyer studied him for a moment, then smiled slightly. "Your determination might be our strongest asset. The courts like to see that kind of commitment." He started making notes on a legal pad. "We'll need to document everything about your current life, your work with veterans, your mentoring programs, your stable home situation." For the next hour, they discussed strategy, paperwork, and next steps. Jack's head was spinning with legal terms and court procedures, but he absorbed every word. As they wrapped up the meeting, Mr. Peterson stood. "I want you to understand. This won't be easy or quick, but if you're willing to fight, I'm willing to help. Jack stood too, extending his hand. I appreciate your honesty, and I don't care how hard it is. That little girl deserves better. Walking out of the office building into the bright morning sunlight, Jack felt a mix of emotions washing over him. Hope warred with uncertainty in his chest. The path ahead looked rough, but he'd never been one to back down from a fight. Sarah walked beside him in silence, letting him process everything. Finally, she spoke. You okay? Yeah, he said, looking up at the sky. Just got a lot of work ahead of us. The courthouse loomed before Jack and Sarah, its stone steps worn smooth by countless footsteps. Jack adjusted his tie, a rare sight for the former biker, and tried to steady his breathing. Sarah stood beside him, clutching a thick folder of documents. Remember, Sarah whispered, just speak from your heart. The judge needs to see the real you. Inside the courtroom, polished wooden benches stretched in neat rows. The morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Jack's weathered hands trembled slightly as he sat down, his eyes fixed on the judge's empty bench. When Daryl entered, Jack's jaw clenched. The man swaggered in, wearing ill-fitting dress clothes that couldn't hide his aggressive demeanor. Their eyes met briefly, and Daryl's lip curled into a sneer. All rise, the bailiff called out as Judge Matthews entered, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. The hearing began with the standard procedures. Sarah presented their evidence first, photographs of Daryl's neglected house, Emma's school records showing frequent absences, and testimonies from her teachers. Jack listened intently, his heart pounding as each piece of evidence was examined. When it was Daryl's turn to speak, he burst from his chair, his face red with anger. This is ridiculous, he shouted. She's my daughter. Who does this old biker think he is? Mr. Harrison, Judge Matthews warned, please control yourself or you'll be held in contempt. Daryl's attorney tried to paint Jack as an interfering stranger with a questionable past, but Jack remained calm, just as Sarah had advised. When it was his turn to speak, he stood slowly, his voice steady despite his nerves. Your Honor, Jack began, I found Emma lying among trash bags in an alley. No child should ever be in that situation. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I'm not perfect. I've made my share of mistakes. But when I saw that little girl, something changed in me. She needs someone who will protect her, love her, and give her the chance she deserves. The judge studied Jack carefully. Mr. McCullen, your past concerns me. How can I be certain you're equipped to care for a child? Because I know what it's like to be lost, Jack replied honestly. I've spent the last 15 years mentoring troubled youth and helping veterans. I may not look like the typical guardian, but I promise you, Emma's safety and happiness will always come first. Judge Matthews removed her glasses, rubbing her temples. The courtroom fell silent as she considered her decision. Jack could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Based on the evidence presented, she finally announced, I am issuing a temporary order removing Emma from Mr. Harrison's custody. She will be placed in emergency foster care while we conduct a thorough investigation into both parties. Daryl jumped up, knocking his chair backward. You can't do this, he yelled. Two bailiffs moved quickly to restrain him. Mr. Harrison, this outburst only confirms my concerns, the judge stated firmly. The order is effective immediately. As they left the courthouse, Sarah squeezed Jack's arm. This is a good first step, she said quietly. Emma will be safe tonight. Jack nodded, relief washing over him like a cool breeze. The weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter, but he knew they still had a long road ahead. Emma would need time to heal, to learn to trust again. He watched the sun setting behind the courthouse, grateful for this small victory but aware that their journey was far from over. The morning, Sun filtered through lace curtains as Jack walked up the path to the foster home. His weathered boots felt heavy on the concrete steps, each step carrying the weight of his concerns for Emma. The house was neat and well kept, with cheerful flowers dotting the garden beds, but Jack's stomach still churned with worry. Mrs. Peterson, the foster mother, greeted him at the door with a kind smile. She was a plump woman in her 50s with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes. "Emma's been asking about you," she said, leading him inside. "She's in the playroom." Jack followed Mrs. Peterson through the house, his leather jacket creaking softly as he walked. The walls were decorated with children's artwork, and the air smelled of fresh-baked cookies. It was a far cry from Daryl's decrepit house, but Jack could sense that Emma still felt lost here. When they reached the playroom, Emma sat alone in a corner, clutching her stuffed bunny. Other foster children played nearby with blocks and dolls, but Emma remained separate, watching them with uncertain eyes. "Hey there, sweetheart," Jack said softly, kneeling despite the protest in his aging joints. "Remember me?" Emma's eyes lit up, though she tried to hide it. "Jack," she whispered, hugging her bunny tighter. "That's right." He settled onto the carpet next to her, giving her space while staying close enough to show he was there for her. "How are you doing here?" Emma shrugged, her small shoulders rising and falling beneath her clean but ill-fitting t-shirt. "Mrs. Peterson is nice," she said quietly. "She made cookies yesterday." "That sounds good." Jack smiled, noting how Emma's hair was neatly combed and her face was clean. "You know, I've been thinking about you a lot." Emma's eyes darted to his face, then away again. Is he coming back?" Her voice trembled. Jack's heart clenched. "No, Emma. You don't have to go back to him. I promise you that." "But what if he finds me?" Her fingers twisted in the bunny's worn fur. "Listen to me," Jack said, his voice gentle but firm. "I won't let that happen. You're safe here, and I'm working very hard to make sure you stay safe." Emma studied his face, seeming to search for any sign of deception. Finding none, she scooted a little closer to him. "Will you visit me again?" "Every chance they let me," Jack promised. "I'm not giving up on you, Emma. Not ever." They spent the next hour together, Jack sitting quietly while Emma slowly opened up. She showed him her bunny's new ribbon that Mrs. Peterson had given her, and even smiled once when Jack made a silly face at her. When it was time to leave, Emma's face fell. "Do you have to go?" "For now," Jack said, standing up slowly. "But I'll be back soon. And remember what I said. You're safe here." Emma nodded, clutching her bunny close. "Promise?" "Cross my heart," Jack said, making the gesture that brought another tiny smile to Emma's face. As he walked to his motorcycle, Jack's determination burned stronger than ever. The foster home was good, but temporary wasn't enough. Emma needed permanence, stability, and love, things he knew he could give her. He started his bike, the familiar rumble doing nothing to quiet the protective instinct that had taken root in his heart. He would win full custody of Emma, no matter what it took. Jack sat across from Sarah at her cramped office desk, surrounded by stacks of paperwork and manila folders. The morning light filtered through dusty blinds, casting shadows across their determined faces. Sarah pulled out a fresh legal pad, her pen poised to take notes. "We need to build an ironclad case," Sarah explained, her voice steady and professional. "The temporary custody order helps, but winning permanent custody is a whole different battle." Jack nodded, his weathered hands clasped together. "Whatever it takes, that little girl deserves better than what she's had." Sarah started making a list. "First, we need character witnesses. Teachers, neighbors, anyone who's seen Emma's living conditions or interactions with Daryl. We also need to show that you can provide a stable home environment. I've got Lena from the diner, Jack offered. She's known me for years, seen how I mentor the local kids. And there's Pastor Mike from the Veterans Group. He can vouch for my community work. Sarah's pen scratched across the paper. Good start. What about your home situation? The judge will want to see that you can provide a proper living environment. Jack shifted in his chair. My place isn't fancy, but it's clean and safe. I've got a spare bedroom that could be Emma's. Already started fixing it up just in case. They spent hours going through potential witnesses and documentation. Sarah helped Jack organize his financial records, proof of employment, and letters of recommendation. They contacted Emma's teachers, who agreed to testify about her behavior changes and signs of neglect they'd observed. Over the next few days, Jack threw himself into preparation. He met with character witnesses, gathered documentation, and worked with Sarah to strengthen their case. They interviewed Emma's school counselor, who provided detailed records of concerning incidents. A neighbor of Daryl's came forward with stories of late-night arguments and crying she'd heard through the walls. Between meetings and paperwork, Jack visited Emma at the foster home whenever possible. Each visit reinforced his determination. The way her eyes lit up when she saw him, how she'd slowly begun to trust him enough to share small stories about her day. It all meant more than he could express. One evening, after another long day of preparation, Jack sat alone in his living room. The house felt different now, full of possibility rather than just memories. He looked around at the space that could become Emma's home. The walls he'd repainted, the bookshelf he'd built for her growing collection of library books, the soft blanket draped over the couch where they could read together. His gaze fell on Emma's stuffed bunny, which she'd asked him to keep safe during one of his visits. It sat on the coffee table, its worn fabric a testament to years of providing comfort to a little girl who'd needed it desperately. Jack picked it up gently, running his thumb over a patch he'd sewn on when he noticed it was coming apart. In the quiet of his home, Jack realized how completely this child had changed his life. From that first moment in the alley, something had shifted inside him. The gruff ex-biker who'd spent years keeping the world at arm's length now found himself fighting with everything he had to create a home for a little girl who needed one. He set the bunny back down carefully, straightening it just so. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more preparation, more steps toward their goal. But for now, in this moment, Jack let himself feel the full weight of what Emma meant to him, and the fierce determination to make sure she never felt unloved or unwanted again. The morning sun cast long shadows through the courthouse windows as Jack straightened his borrowed tie. He'd never felt comfortable in formal clothes, but today wasn't about him. Sarah stood beside him, her professional demeanor a stark contrast to his obvious nervousness. "Remember to breathe," she whispered, giving his arm a gentle squeeze. The courtroom doors opened, and they filed in. Jack's heavy boots echoed against the polished floor. He caught sight of Daryl on the other side, wearing what looked like a new shirt that couldn't hide the hardness in his face. Emma wasn't present. They'd agreed it would be better that way. Still, Jack could picture her wide eyes and that tattered stuffed bunny she always carried. His hands trembled slightly as he took his seat beside their lawyer. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Marion Peterson entered, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had kind eyes but a stern expression that gave nothing away. The hearing began with their lawyer presenting the evidence they'd gathered. School records showing Emma's frequent absences, medical reports documenting unexplained bruises, testimony from her teacher about Emma's withdrawn behavior and frightened demeanor. Daryl shifted in his seat, his jaw clenching tighter with each piece of evidence. When it was his turn to speak, he lurched to his feet, his face flushed red. "This is all lies," he spat out. "That's my daughter, mine. This old biker doesn't know anything about being a father." "Mr. Harris," Judge Peterson warned, "control yourself or you'll be held in contempt." Daryl's lawyer tried to salvage the situation, presenting arguments about blood relations and parental rights, but Daryl's outburst had already filled the room with tension. When Jack's turn came, he stood slowly, his weathered hands gripping the podium. He looked directly at Judge Peterson, his voice rough with emotion but steady. "Your Honor, I know I'm not what most people picture when they think of a father figure. I've made my share of mistakes in life." He paused, swallowing hard. "But when I found Emma that day, lying among those trash bags like she was nothing, something in me changed. She deserves to feel safe, to feel loved, to know what it's like to have someone who puts her first." The judge leaned forward slightly. "And you believe you can provide that, Mr. McCullen?" "I can't promise I'll be perfect," Jack replied honestly. "But I can promise that every decision I make will be about what's best for Emma. She'll never have to hide in fear again. Never have to wonder if she matters." Daryl snorted loudly from across the room, but Judge Peterson silenced him with a sharp look. After both sides finished their arguments, the judge removed her glasses and looked at everyone in the courtroom. "This is not a decision I take lightly. I'll need time to review all the evidence and testimony presented today. I'll have my decision by tomorrow morning." Outside the courtroom, Jack slumped onto a wooden bench, emotionally drained. Sarah sat beside him, her usual professional composure softening. "You did well in there, Jack," she said quietly. "Really well." He nodded, unable to speak. The weight of the day, of everything that had led to this moment, pressed down on his shoulders. All they could do now was wait, and hope that tomorrow would bring the chance to give Emma the life she deserved. The morning sun filtered through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Jack's weathered hands gripped the edge of the wooden bench, his knuckles white with tension. Sarah sat beside him, her usually composed face showing signs of worry as they waited for the judge's decision. The bailiff's voice cut through the heavy silence. "All rise." Jack stood, his legs feeling unsteady. Judge Harrison entered the courtroom, her face unreadable as she took her seat. The rustling of papers seemed to echo forever before she finally looked up. "After careful consideration of all evidence presented, and taking into account the best interests of the child," Judge Harrison began, her voice clear and steady, "this court finds that custody of Emma shall be granted to Jack McCullen." The words hit Jack like a physical force. His legs nearly gave out, and Sarah grabbed his arm to steady him. Tears welled up in his eyes as the judge continued explaining the details of the ruling, but all he could focus on was that one simple truth. Emma was going to stay with him. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you, Sarah. I couldn't have done this without you." Sarah squeezed his arm, her own eyes glistening. "You did this, Jack. Your love for Emma made this happen." They found Emma waiting outside with her social worker, clutching her stuffed bunny. When Jack knelt down to her level, she looked at him with those big, questioning eyes. "You're coming home with me, sweetheart," Jack said softly. "For good this time." Emma's face lit up like a sunrise, and she threw herself into Jack's arms. He held her close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, feeling her tiny arms wrapped around his neck. The drive home was filled with a comfortable silence, broken only by Emma's occasional happy humming from the back seat. As they turned onto Jack's street, he could see several cars parked outside his house. His heart swelled at the sight. Lena stood on the front porch, her warm smile visible from the street. Behind her, a Welcome Home Emma banner fluttered in the breeze. Several of Jack's friends from the Veterans Center were there too, along with some of Emma's teachers who had helped build their case. As Jack helped Emma out of the car, Lena came down the steps to meet them. "Welcome home, Sweet Pea," she said, opening her arms to Emma, who gave her a shy but genuine hug. The house was filled with the smell of Lena's cooking. She'd prepared all of Emma's favorites that she'd learned about during their visits to the diner. The living room was decorated with balloons and streamers, and on the coffee table sat a small cake with Emma's name written in pink frosting. Jack watched as Emma took in everything with wide-eyed wonder. She turned to look at him, a smile spreading across her face that made his heart feel like it might burst. "Is this really my home now?" she asked softly. Jack knelt down beside her, gently taking her small hand in his. "Yes, sweetheart. This is your home, and we're your family now. All of us." Emma looked around at the gathered faces, Lena wiping tears from her eyes, Sarah beaming proudly, and all the others who had come together to welcome her home. For the first time since Jack had found her in that alley, she looked completely at peace. The aroma of Lena's famous pot roast filled Jack's modest home. The dining room table, usually bare and lonely, now bustled with life as Emma helped set out the plates, her small hands carefully placing each fork and knife just so. Her stuffed bunny sat propped in an empty chair, watching over the proceedings like a silent guardian. "Careful with those glasses, sweetheart," Jack said, his weathered face creasing into a gentle smile. The sight of Emma moving so confidently around what was now their home made his heart swell. "I know, Jack," Emma replied, her voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there when they first met. She'd started calling him Jack instead of Mr. McCullen a few days ago, and each time she did, it felt like a small victory. Lena emerged from the kitchen, carrying the steaming pot roast. "First proper family dinner," she announced, her eyes twinkling. "And my, doesn't this table look beautiful, Emma?" Emma beamed at the praise, smoothing down her new blue dress, the first piece of clothing she'd picked out herself. Sarah arrived moments later, bringing a homemade apple pie and a bright smile. As they settled around the table, Jack watched Emma dig into her meal with enthusiasm. Just weeks ago, she'd been that frightened little girl in the alley, and now here she was, chattering about her new teacher and the friends she'd made at school. "Miss Thompson says I can join the reading club," Emma announced between bites. "She says I'm catching up real fast." "That's wonderful, honey," Sarah said, reaching over to squeeze Emma's hand. "I knew you could do it." Jack felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Tell them about the art project you're working on," he prompted, remembering how excited she'd been when she'd told him about it that morning. Emma's eyes lit up. "We're making family trees. Ms. Thompson said we can include whoever we want in our family, not just—" She hesitated for a moment, then continued, "Not just who we're related to." "That's right," Lena nodded, understanding flooding her kind face. "Family is who loves you, sweetie." They ate and talked, the conversation flowing easily. Jack noticed how Emma had already developed little routines, the way she saved her carrots for last, how she'd occasionally reach over to pat her stuffed bunny's head, the little satisfied sigh she'd make after taking a sip of milk. After dinner, while Lena and Sarah cleaned up, despite Jack's protests, Emma sat at the kitchen counter working on her homework. Jack watched her, marveling at how naturally she fit into his life, as if there had always been a Emma-shaped space just waiting to be filled. The setting sun cast long shadows through the windows, painting the kitchen in warm, golden light. Emma's hair glowed like a halo as she bent over her math problems, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. "Need any help there, kiddo?" Jack asked. Emma shook her head, determination written across her face. "I can do it. Ms. Thompson showed me a trick." Jack moved to the window, gazing out at the sunset. The sky was ablaze with orange and pink, the same colors that had painted the morning sky the day he'd found Emma. He thought about how different his life had been then. Quiet, orderly, and empty. Now his home was filled with children's books, stuffed animals, and countless drawings stuck to the refrigerator with bright magnets. The soft scratching of Emma's pencil, the quiet murmur of Lena and Sarah's voices, the homey sounds of dishes being washed. It all blended into a symphony of belonging. Jack had never thought he'd have this, never imagined he could be worthy of such simple, profound joy. The morning sun streamed through Jack's kitchen window, casting warm patches of light across the worn wooden table. He sat there, nursing his coffee, watching as Emma carefully spread peanut butter on her toast. Her small hands worked with determination, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. "Need any help there, kiddo?" Jack asked, his gruff voice gentle. Emma shook her head, her messy morning hair swaying. "I can do it, Jack." She looked up at him with those big eyes of hers, now holding more trust than fear. "But thank you." Jack's heart swelled. Just a few months ago, she'd barely speak a word. Now here she was, making her own breakfast and chattering away about her upcoming math test. The transformation still amazed him. After breakfast, they settled at the kitchen table with Emma's homework spread out before them. Math wasn't Jack's strong suit. His expertise lay more in fixing motorcycles than solving equations, but he was determined to help. "Okay, so if you have 12 cookies," Jack began, using the example from her textbook, "and you want to share them equally with 3 friends." Emma's face scrunched up in thought. "That means we each get 4 cookies?" She looked up at him uncertainly. "That's exactly right," Jack beamed with pride. "You're getting really good at this, Emma." A smile spread across her face, lighting up her eyes. These were the moments Jack treasured most, watching her confidence grow, seeing her realize she was capable of so much more than she'd been told. After finishing homework, they moved to the living room floor where Emma had set up her favorite board game. Jack's knees protested as he lowered himself onto the carpet, but he didn't mind. The sound of Emma's giggles as she moved her game piece around the board made any discomfort worth it. "You're not letting me win, are you?" she asked suspiciously after her 3rd victory. Jack raised his hands in surrender. "Wouldn't dream of it. You're just that good." The mailman's arrival interrupted their 4th game. Jack walked to the front door, collecting the stack of envelopes. Among the usual bills and advertisements, a formal-looking letter caught his eye. His heart skipped a beat when he recognized the courthouse seal. With slightly trembling hands, he opened the envelope. As he read the contents, emotions washed over him like waves. The court had officially finalized Emma's adoption. She was legally his daughter now. He looked over at Emma, still sitting cross-legged on the floor, arranging game pieces. She was humming softly to herself, completely at ease in their home. Their home. Jack felt a deep sense of peace settle in his chest. All the struggles, the paperwork, the anxious waiting, it had all led to this moment. "Hey, Emma," he called out, his voice a bit rougher than usual. "Come here for a second." She padded over, looking curious. "What is it?" Jack knelt down to her level, holding the letter. "Remember how we talked about making our family official?" She nodded, her eyes growing wide. "Well, this letter says it's done. You're officially my daughter now." Emma stared at the paper for a long moment, then threw her arms around Jack's neck. He held her close, feeling the warmth of her small body against his chest. No words were needed. They both understood the magnitude of this moment. Looking at the official document in his hand, Jack felt a profound sense of accomplishment. But more than that, he felt complete. The road that had led him to Emma might have been long and winding, but it had brought him exactly where he needed to be. The afternoon sun streamed through Jack's living room windows as he and Emma hung colorful streamers across the ceiling. His weathered hands worked carefully with the delicate paper, while Emma directed him from below, her face glowing with excitement. "A little more to the left, Jack," she called out, clutching her freshly cleaned stuffed bunny. The toy had become a symbol of their journey together, transformed from a tattered reminder of her past into a cherished companion of her present. Jack adjusted the streamer, his heart warming at the sound of Emma calling his name. Gone was the frightened little girl he'd found among the trash bags. In her place stood a child beginning to bloom with confidence and joy. The doorbell chimed, and Emma raced to answer it. "Wait for me, sweetheart," Jack called, climbing down from his stepladder. Together they opened the door to find Lena holding an enormous chocolate cake. "Nobody throws a party without my famous triple chocolate surprise," Lena announced, winking at Emma. The little girl's eyes widened at the sight of the dessert, decorated with colorful sprinkles and fresh strawberries. Soon, the house filled with guests. Sarah arrived with an armful of presents, and Jack's old biker friends rolled up on their motorcycles, their leather jackets now adorned with pins supporting various children's charities. The contrast between their tough appearances and their gentle interactions with Emma brought a smile to Jack's face. "Bear," one of his old riding buddies called out, using Jack's former road name. "Never thought I'd see the day when you'd be hosting tea parties." He gestured to the neat row of cups Emma had insisted on setting out. "Life's full of surprises," Jack replied, watching Emma show her stuffed bunny to the group of burly bikers, who listened with exaggerated interest. The afternoon passed in a blur of laughter and conversation. The house, once so quiet and empty, now buzzed with life. Emma flitted between guests like a social butterfly, her previous shyness melting away in the warmth of acceptance and love. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows, Jack gathered everyone in the living room. He stood near the fireplace, holding a glass of sparkling cider. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, surrounded by her new extended family. Jack cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. "I want to thank you all for being here today," he began, looking around at the faces of those who had helped make this moment possible. "A few months ago, I was just a lonely old biker taking my morning ride. Then I found this little angel." He gestured to Emma, who beamed up at him, and everything changed. He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Some people might say we're an odd bunch. Bikers, diner owners, social workers, and a little girl with her stuffed bunny. But standing, here now, I can't imagine a more perfect family." Lena wiped away a tear, and Sarah squeezed Emma's shoulder. The bikers nodded in agreement, their tough exteriors softening at Jack's words. "To family," Jack raised his glass, his voice thick with emotion. "Not the one we expected, but the one we chose." "To family," the room echoed, and Emma jumped up to hug Jack's waist. He lifted her into his arms, holding her close as their guests raised their glasses in celebration. The moment captured everything Jack had never known he needed: love, purpose, and the joy of giving a child the home she deserved. In Emma's bright smile, he saw all the possibilities of their future together, and his heart felt full to bursting. The spring sunshine warmed the park as Jack spread a red and white checkered blanket beneath an old oak tree. Emma carefully placed her beloved stuffed bunny on one corner of the blanket, making sure it had the perfect view of their picnic. Her golden hair caught the light as she moved, reminding Jack of summer wheat swaying in the breeze. "How about right here, kiddo?" Jack asked, setting down their wicker basket. His weathered hands, once accustomed to gripping motorcycle handlebars, now gently unpacked sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Emma nodded enthusiastically. "It's perfect. We can see the whole playground from here." Her eyes sparkled with a joy that made Jack's heart swell. It wasn't long ago that those same eyes had been filled with fear and uncertainty. They settled into their lunch, Emma swinging her legs as she bit into her peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Jack watched her, amazed at how much she'd changed in the past few months. Gone was the frightened little girl he'd found among the trash bags. In her place sat a child who was learning to trust, to laugh, to be happy. "Dad?" Emma said softly, wiping crumbs from her chin. The word still made Jack's chest tighten with emotion. He'd never thought anyone would call him that, let alone mean it with such sincerity. "Yes, sweetheart." "I'm really happy now." She hugged her knees to her chest, looking out at the other children playing on the swings. "I used to be scared all the time, but I'm not anymore. Not with you." Jack cleared his throat, fighting back the lump that had formed there. "Come here, Emma." He opened his arms, and she scooted over to sit beside him. "I want you to know something important. You remember that day I found you?" Emma nodded against his side. "Well, that day changed my life forever, and I promise you, nothing will ever separate us. You're stuck with this old bear for good." He gave her a gentle squeeze, and she giggled. "I like being stuck with you," she said, reaching for an apple from their basket. "And with Bunny, too." She patted her stuffed rabbit's head affectionately. They spent the afternoon watching clouds roll by, making shapes out of their fluffy forms. Emma saw dragons and castles, while Jack pointed out motorcycles, making her laugh. When a butterfly landed on their blanket, Emma held her breath in wonder, not wanting to scare it away. "Look how pretty its wings are," she whispered, her eyes wide with amazement. "Just like you," Jack said softly. "It's not afraid anymore. It knows it's safe here." The afternoon light began to soften, casting long shadows across the park grass. Jack packed up their picnic while Emma carefully dusted off her bunny. As they stood to leave, Emma slipped her small hand into Jack's large one, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Ready to head home, kiddo?" Jack asked, swinging their joined hands slightly. "Yes," Emma replied, hugging Bunny close with her free arm. "Can we come back tomorrow?" "Anytime you want, sweetheart. Anytime you want." Walking through the park, their shadows stretched out before them, and Jack felt a deep sense of peace. The little girl whose hand he held wasn't just his second chance. She was his miracle, his purpose, his family. Each step they took together was a step further away from the darkness of their pasts and into the light of their shared future. The community center buzzed with activity as people filed into rows of folding chairs. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting warm patches across the worn wooden floor. Jack stood at the edge of the small stage, his weathered hands gripping a piece of paper he'd barely glanced at all morning. His leather vest felt snug against his chest, a reminder of the man he used to be. Emma sat in the front row between Lena and Sarah, her cleaned-up stuffed bunny clutched tight in her lap. She wore a yellow dress that made her look like a ray of sunshine, her hair neatly braided by Lena that morning. The sight of her gave Jack strength. "Friends," Jack began, his deep voice carrying across the quiet room, "I never thought I'd be standing here today." He cleared his throat, tucking the unused notes into his pocket. "Most of you knew me as the Bear, the guy who rode alone and kept to himself. Some of you probably crossed the street when you saw me coming." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Jack's eyes found Emma's, and she gave him an encouraging smile. "But life has a way of surprising you," he continued. Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest moments. For me, that moment was finding a little girl among the trash bags in an alley. His voice caught slightly. I thought I was saving her that day, but the truth is, she saved me too. The room grew still, hanging on his words. Jack's hands steadied on the podium. I spent years thinking my past defined me, that the mistakes I'd made would always keep me on the outside, looking in. But Emma, he paused, gathering himself. Emma taught me that love doesn't care about your past. It only matters what you choose to do today, right now. Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek as Lena squeezed Emma's shoulder. This community stepped up when we needed you, Jack went on. You didn't see a rough ex-biker. You saw a man trying to do right by a child who needed help. Every one of you who brought meals, who offered support, who testified in court, you showed me what second chances really look like. Jack's voice grew stronger, more passionate. Sometimes redemption isn't about big gestures. Sometimes it's about making breakfast for a little girl who's never had anyone care if she ate. Sometimes it's about reading bedtime stories to chase away nightmares. Sometimes it's just being there, day after day, proving that love is stronger than fear. Emma beamed up at him, her eyes shining with pride and love. I stand here today as living proof that it's never too late to change, never too late to open your heart, never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Jack's voice filled with emotion. To everyone here who's ever felt lost or alone, who's ever thought their past was too dark to overcome, there's hope. There's always hope. The community center erupted in applause. Some people stood, others wiped away tears. But Jack only had eyes for Emma, who sat straight and tall in her chair, clapping harder than anyone else in the room. Her face glowed with joy and pride, and in that moment, Jack knew that every step of their journey had been worth it. The applause continued to fill the room, wrapping around them like a warm embrace, a testament to the power of love and second chances. Jack pulled into the prison parking lot, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. The gray concrete building loomed before him, a stark reminder of the consequences of bad choices. He'd been wrestling with this decision for weeks, but he knew he needed closure, not just for himself, but for Emma too. The prison guards led him through a series of heavy metal doors. Each one clanked shut behind him with a finality that made his skin crawl. The visiting room was plain and cold, with metal tables bolted to the floor and uncomfortable plastic chairs. When they brought Daryl in, Jack almost didn't recognize him. Prison had changed him. His once intimidating frame seemed smaller somehow, less threatening. His eyes were bloodshot, and his prison uniform hung loose on his frame. "Didn't expect to see you here," Daryl muttered as he sat down across from Jack. Jack leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "I needed to see you, to understand." Daryl's eyes darted around the room, avoiding Jack's direct gaze. "How's she doing?" "Emma's doing well," Jack replied, noting how Daryl flinched at his daughter's name. "She's top of her class now, making friends, learning to trust people again." A flicker of emotion crossed Daryl's face. That's good." He ran his hands through his unkempt hair. "Look, I know I messed up." "Messed up?" Jack's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "You did more than mess up, Daryl. You broke that little girl's trust. You were supposed to protect her." "You think I don't know?" "That?" Daryl snapped, then immediately lowered his voice when a guard looked their way. "It wasn't all my fault. The drugs, the drinking. I wasn't myself." Jack shook his head slowly. "There's always a choice, Daryl. Always." Silence stretched between them. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. "I want you to know something," Jack continued. I forgive you." Daryl's head snapped up, surprise evident on his face. "Not for you," Jack clarified. "For Emma and for myself. Carrying around anger, it doesn't help anyone. But understand this, I will always protect her. She's my daughter now." Daryl's jaw clenched. "You think you can just replace me?" "No," Jack replied steadily. "I'm not replacing anyone. I'm being the father she needs, the father she deserves." Daryl slumped in his chair, the fight leaving him. Maybe that's for the best." He paused, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. "I do love her, you know, in my own way." "I believe you," Jack said. "But love isn't enough. It needs to come with responsibility, with action." The guard signaled that visiting time was almost over. Jack stood up, his chair scraping against the concrete floor. "Take care of her," Daryl said quietly, almost like a prayer. "I will. Always." Jack walked out of the prison, each step feeling lighter than the last. The morning sun had broken through the clouds, warming his face as he reached his motorcycle. He felt the weight of years of anger and uncertainty lifting from his shoulders. It wasn't perfect closure. Life rarely offered that. But it was enough. He started his bike, the familiar rumble beneath him grounding him in the present moment. Emma would be waiting for him at home, probably working on her science project or reading one of her beloved books. The thought made him smile. Sometimes the best families weren't the ones you were born into, but the ones you chose to build. Jack sat in his favorite armchair, watching Emma as she worked on her homework at the kitchen table. The evening sun cast long shadows through the windows, painting their small home in warm, golden light. His weathered hands held a cup of coffee, and for the 100th time that week, he marveled at how different his life had become. Emma's stuffed bunny sat propped against her math book as she chewed thoughtfully on her pencil. Her hair, now neatly brushed and tied back with colorful ribbons, caught the light. She was no longer the scared little girl he'd found among the trash bags. The bruises had faded, replaced by a healthy glow and occasional smiles that lit up the room. "All done," Emma announced, carefully closing her notebook. She gathered her things, tucking them into her backpack, the new one Jack had bought her, covered in rainbow butterflies. Jack set his coffee down. "Good job, kiddo. Want some hot chocolate?" Emma nodded eagerly, and Jack moved to the kitchen. As he heated the milk and stirred in the chocolate powder, he heard Emma's small feet padding across the floor behind him. "Jack?" Her voice was soft but steady, so different from the terrified whispers of months ago. "Yeah, sweetheart. I wanted to say thank you." Emma clutched her bunny to her chest, her wide eyes serious. "For finding me that day, for not giving up on me." Jack's throat tightened. He turned from the stove, kneeling down to meet her at eye level. "Emma, honey. I know it wasn't easy," she continued, her words carrying wisdom beyond her years. "The other kids at school, they have regular families. But I think we're better than regular, because we chose each other." Jack felt tears prick at his eyes. This little girl, who'd been through so much, had such a beautiful way of seeing things. He reached out and gently squeezed her shoulder. "You're right about that, kiddo. We did choose each other." He smiled, his gruff voice softening. "And it's the best choice I ever made." Emma stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. Jack held her close, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that nothing could break their bond. Not Daryl, not the system, not anyone. "The hot chocolate's ready," he said after a while, clearing his throat. "Want to take it outside? The stars should be coming out soon." Emma's face lit up. "Can we sit on the porch swing?" "You bet." They settled onto the old wooden swing. Emma curled up next to Jack with her hot chocolate, her bunny tucked safely between them. The evening air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine from the vine Jack had planted when Emma moved in. As the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Jack felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. Emma pointed out constellations she'd learned in school, her voice animated and happy. Jack listened, his arm around her shoulders, knowing in his heart that this quiet moment, this little girl, this love, was what family truly meant. The porch swing creaked gently as they rocked, two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, now bound together by something stronger than blood. The choice to love, to protect, to belong. Jack sat in his favorite leather armchair, holding a silver picture frame in his weathered hands. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the window caught the glass, making the photograph shine. In it, Emma beamed at the camera, her arms wrapped tightly around Jack's neck as he gave her a piggyback ride. Her stuffed bunny dangled from one hand, and Jack's smile was wider than he'd ever thought possible. He ran his thumb over the frame, remembering the day the photo was taken. It had been their first weekend as an official family, just after the adoption papers were finalized. Lena had insisted on capturing the moment, saying they needed proper family photos. "Family," Jack whispered to himself, still amazed at how that word had come to mean so much. From the kitchen came the sounds of Emma humming while she worked on her homework. The peaceful domestic noise filled Jack with a warmth he'd never known in all his years on the road. His old leather jacket hung by the door, next to Emma's bright yellow raincoat, a visual reminder of how much his life had changed. Looking around the living room, Jack noticed all the small ways Emma had transformed his once sparse home. Colorful drawings decorated the refrigerator, a collection of children's books lined the shelves, and her stuffed animals had claimed permanent residence on the couch. Each item represented a piece of the healing they'd both found together. The sound of Emma's footsteps pulled Jack from his thoughts. She padded into the living room in her sock feet, clutching a math worksheet. "Dad?" she asked, and Jack's heart swelled as it did every time she called him that. "Can you help me with this problem?" "Course I can, sweetheart," he said, carefully setting the photo on the side table. Emma climbed onto the arm of his chair, settling against his shoulder with the natural ease of a child who felt completely safe. As Jack helped her work through the multiplication tables, he marveled at how far they'd come from that first meeting in the alley. The frightened little girl who'd been curled up among the trash bags was now a confident, happy child who knew she was loved. And the lonely ex-biker who'd found her had discovered a purpose greater than anything he'd known in his previous life. "You know what?" Emma said suddenly, looking up from her homework. "I'm really glad you found me that day." Jack's throat tightened with emotion. "Me too, kiddo. Me too." She hugged him tight, and Jack held her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. In that moment, all the struggles they'd faced, the court battles, the sleepless nights, the painful memories they'd both had to overcome, felt worth it. The afternoon light painted long shadows across the floor as father and daughter sat together, working through math problems and sharing quiet conversations. Jack's past no longer weighed him down like a heavy chain. Instead, it had become the path that led him exactly where he needed to be. Emma's laughter filled the room as she finally solved a particularly tricky problem, and Jack couldn't help but join in. This was what healing looked like. Not the absence of scars, but the presence of joy despite them. He'd found his redemption not in running from his past, but in using everything he'd learned to give Emma the father she deserved. Together, they'd built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their lives. And as Jack watched Emma return to her homework with determination, he knew with absolute certainty that every step of his long, winding road had led him home. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.